So it feels weird to follow up a video where I said I'm conflicted on Superman and Lois Season 4 with a video where I'm saying that the most recent episode includes some of the greatest Superman stuff ever put to TV or any film. But I mean, Season 4 Episode 7, called A Regular Guy, was getting insane praise from all of the early reactions, all of the early screeners and stuff like that in the days before the episode came out. And you know, usually that's a lot of hyperbole, a lot of people overblowing the hype for the episode. I tend not to always fully jump into the hype and believe that what we're about to get is going to be as good as it is, because I feel like there's always a little bit of that overblown. But I mean, Season 4 Episode 7 is one of the very rare times where, to me at least, the hype is warranted. That this episode is one of the best hours that Superman and Lois has put out in its entire 4-season run. And if the final 3 episodes don't live up to this episode, then I'm honestly fine with that, because there was also like a sense of finality to this episode where it kind of felt like things were wrapped up and arcs were finished and things were completed in a way that the final 3 episodes might feel a little bit more like an epilogue in a sense, whereas this was like the conclusion of Clark Kent's arc on the show so far in a way, which I always kind of love when shows do that, when they leave room that a big arc or a big thing you're expecting to be at the end of the final season actually happens early on in that season, or sooner than you think it's going to happen, and then that leaves room for the final couple episodes to be more like dealing with the aftermath or dealing with the events of that. Because I guess to compare it to Supergirl, where Supergirl did a similar thing in their final season, where the final episode, I mean, I guess spoiler alert if you haven't seen Supergirl, but the final scene of Supergirl's final episode is Kara revealing her identity to the world as Supergirl. And you don't get to see any of the fallout of that, any of the aftermath of that. You get what they're doing and the show ends there. Superman and Lois is doing it better, in my opinion, where we're actually going to get to see the ramifications and what that means for the characters on a personal level and stuff like that going forward into the final few episodes, which is extremely exciting for me. Like, yeah, we got Lex Luthor. Yeah, Doomsday's probably still around. Yeah, maybe Milton Fine Brainiac stuff. I'm more interested in what this character stuff means for Clark and the family now that the secret is fully out in the world. Like, that is what's most exciting to me. But I kind of just really want to discuss and break down some of the character scenes from the episode, because they're some of the best comic book TV has ever made, in my opinion. Like, for an episode that pretty much doesn't have any action and is very much a slow burn and just leading up to something, this was more exciting to me than most fight scenes in comic book shows. Like, it's just so well done. I guess to start with the scene where Eric Burgandy comes into the diner and, you know, he fires the gun, and Clark just sort of has this look of disappointment and regret in his face, almost guilt as well. And not that Eric has fired the gun, like he's not, you know, disappointed in Eric for firing the gun or anything like that. It's more like he's got disappointment and guilt and regret in himself. And it's so fascinating to me. And what I think I love more than anything about this episode is its excellent ability to not put all of these details in the dialogue. Like, a lot of this stuff is in the reactions and the facial expressions and the surrounding context of the scenes, rather than it being spoon-fed to us in dialogue itself. Now, some of this is still said in dialogue, of course, but it's well written when it is. But my read on the regret and the guilt and the disappointment in Clark's face isn't that he's disappointed in, like, Eric firing the gun or something like that, like I said, but it's now that he needs to grapple with the fact that everyone around him and everyone he's ever been close to is going to learn that Clark has lied to them, that Clark has kept things from them, that Clark hurt people, that he pushed people away because of his secret. And he does say this later on in the interview with Janet, that what he regrets the most is hurting everyone. But I just think it's an unbelievably smart way to go about this whole thing and about the reveal, because most Superman material goes into this with the angle of Clark doesn't want to tell people he loves because it puts a target on their back, or it makes them vulnerable to, like, Lex Luthor or any of Superman's other enemies. You know, if they know his secret, or if his secret gets out, it means that the villains are going to come for the people he loves, all that sort of stuff. You know, as traditional sort of superhero thing, most superhero things kind of grapple with this. But I think it's a bit of a boring trope at this point, and it's a bit of an overused trope at this point. But instead, the show going at it from the angle of, I'm just disappointed in myself for letting the people around me feel lied to and manipulated, that hurts me more than, you know, being worried that villains are going to come for my family or something like that. Like, this fundamentally feels like Clark Kent, like a Clark Kent struggle, more so than many other adaptations of Superman have been able to convey and to manage. It's like he has this feeling, it's this human feeling inside him of feeling like he's lied to people, and he hates that. And that's more important to him than worrying about protecting, you know, the people he loves from bad guys and stuff like that. That's just a Clark Kent struggle. That's just a human Clark Kent struggle that I think is something that this show always nails, is its ability to make Clark feel human and feel like he has real human struggles. It makes him relatable in a way that I think the James Gunn films also need to really hammer home. Like, that's how you make Superman interesting and entertaining to a wider audience who isn't already into the character. You make him relatable, you showcase why he's human and not just the alien elements. And this show is just that to a T. But then we have the whole bullet time sequence, which, by the way, this sequence was phenomenal. The slowdown looked so much better than we usually see on superhero shows. Like most superhero shows, you know, like Flash, Smallville, stuff like that, have done bullet time slowdown effects like this. And I don't know if they've looked better than Superman and Lois's episode here. You know, even with that lessened VFX budget, they still know how to use it when it needs to be used and use it where it works and where it counts. But this just whole scene is potentially my favorite on-screen Superman moment in any movie or in any TV show. Like, I mean, I know it's recency bias, it's a really recent episode, but I've rewatched the episode so many more times than people should probably rewatch an episode that only came out this week. But I mean, after this many rewatches, it's not getting old. I feel like I could watch this scene over and over and over again. The whole bullet bit hitting off of the S really reminded me of like the Superman Returns scene where Brandon Routh gets shot in the eye and the bullet just kind of smashes on his eye. Reminded me of that. But everything around this, just from a character perspective, was so interesting. Like, I love that it just gave Clark this final reflective moment to look around, experience the world, experience Lois, experience Smallville one last time with his secret still in, like, you know, still kept inside of him, still not out there. And like this was just really interesting to me because that final reflective look at Lois, where it's like in that moment, despite the fact that a gun has been fired, everyone around her in this diner, everyone in this diner besides Lois, is freaking out. You know, the reactions are worry, scare, whatever. Like everyone is either looking at the gun, at the bullet, or they're trying to, like, you know, jump out of the way. Everyone except for Lois. Lois's eyes are fixated on Clark in that moment. Like, she's not scared. She knows Clark's got it. And she's putting her faith and everything that she knows and believes in Clark in that moment. It's like, no matter what Clark does, it's going to be the right move. Whether he decides to reveal himself, whether he does some Superman hijinks to you know, keep his secret intact, whatever, she's on board with it. You know, she's looking right at him, and Clark's just looking back at her. It's just so well done. Like, it doesn't matter what happens in that moment because it's going to be Clark's choice, and she's there for it no matter what. Now, the following scene to that, where we go back to the Kent family, to the Kent farm, and we have, you know, Clark, Lois, Jordan, Jonathan sitting around the table, and they're all discussing it and debating it, and Clark's like, just trying to say that he won't do it if nobody else is on board with it, and everyone is like, Clark, if you think this is what needs to be done, this is what needs to be done. Everything will change after it, but if you think it's time, it's time. But my read on the main point of this episode was about Superman going away and Clark Kent taking the stage, or I guess also instead of that could be more so that the line between Superman and Clark Kent is blurring and going away, sort of thing, where it's like the two characters are becoming the one, the two personas are becoming the one now for the final 3 episodes. Like, I guess you could say Superman and Clark Kent is gone, and there's just who he is now. There's no need to hide who he is. There's no need to pretend he's one person or not the other person. It's just one person now. I feel like with the identity out in the open to Smallville and to the world, Clark has completed his transformation that by the end of this episode, we've seen his arc to be completed. And the final set of scenes in this episode together just had a very finality feel to it, where it's like we're watching the end of Superman and Lois as we've known it for the past 4 seasons. You know, like we have that scene where Clark is walking past all the Daily Planet crew in the Kent farm, which is made up a lot of the IRL Superman set crew. So it you know, it also has that sense of closure to it where they're finally on screen to kind of get a little chance to get their work recognized and get themselves recognized, which is really cool. Then we get this recap from Janet Olsen about Clark's history as Superman for the past 20 years, leading to Clark being able to talk about himself and his life and his experience and what makes him the same as any other person. Then we follow this up with an excellent scene where Clark goes to put his glasses on, and it's like he's stopping himself and he's struggling on what he has to do, and he's struggling on whether to put them on or not. Like, he doesn't need them, but it's been such an important facet and factor of who he is as a person. Like, whether or not he needs them, the glasses have been part of his daily structure and his routine, and now he's questioning and having this inner struggle of if not wearing them is the right thing to do, because yes, everyone knows Clark Kent is Superman now, but everyone still knows Clark as being the glasses guy. And does he want to change that now? Does he want to change how people perceive him as Clark? Like, does he want the line between Clark and Superman to blur? You know, even if everybody knows the truth, does he still want to wear the glasses when he's not Superman, sort of thing, when he's not in the suit? And then we end this scene with him finally accepting that this is his life now. This is who he is going forward. That he's still him, but there's a change. I mean, all of this by him going out into Smallville and in the diner for the first time, no hiding, no deciding which version of himself it is. It's just Clark, it's just Superman, it's whatever you want to call him. And then you can also tell that there is this worry in him when he gets to the diner that people are going to perceive him differently now because the last thing Clark wants to be treated at is differently, so that's his biggest fear. Or like he doesn't want to be looked at differently, he doesn't want to be looked at like an alien, he just wants to be seen as, you know, somebody from Smallville, as just Clark Kent. But then there's that moment of validation when he walks into the diner and Denise just says, "Hey, Mr. Kent." And then the smile that Clark gives is just so genuine and so real. And it's like Clark was terrified about how the people of Smallville will treat him now, but he's immediately given that sign that for the people of Smallville, at least, things are the same. They're going to treat him as he always was. Clark hasn't changed. It's still him. And his person hasn't changed. And I don't know, maybe a lot of this is me looking too much into it, but I feel like this was all written in a really, really well put together way that it's just makes me super proud of the show and super happy the show was going out with an episode like this because it's pretty perfect. I talked in my last video about how I kind of wanted the Kent family as a whole to get more character stuff once Clark returned from the dead and that we'd kind of been missing that, but I feel like this episode 100% brought that around for me in a lot of ways. And Tyler Hoechlin was... man. Alright, so Bitsy Tulloch has shown time and time again on this show why she deserves to be talked about as the best Lois Lane. Tyler's given us a lot of that too, but I do feel like this episode is his standout among the entire show. After 4 seasons, I don't know how anyone could have been on the fence about his character anyway, but I feel like this is the episode where if you were on the fence about his character, like if somebody was saying, I'm not going to watch Superman and Lois, Tyler Hoechlin's not my Clark Kent or whatever, I feel like, spoilers be damned, you show them this episode and they're like, okay, that guy's Clark Kent, that guy's Superman, I like that. Like, yeah, okay, maybe he's the best Superman. Because I don't know, that's just how I felt after this episode. Like, Bitsy's had her standout episodes. Tyler's been fantastic in a lot of episodes, but I think this is his standout. Like, this is his magnum opus among the show. There's not much else I kind of want to delve into from the episode. I feel like those final 15 minutes are so amazing. And while the first 25 are good, it's just the final 15 outshines everything else. The flashbacks are really good. Felt like a sort of sequel to season 1, episode 11, which was the mostly flashback episode showcasing Clark in his early days as Superman and his early days in Metropolis. And that's still my favorite episode of the show. So I think I'm always going to be a little biased towards getting more flashbacks to Daily Planet Metropolis stuff because my favorite episode was that. So of course I'm going to enjoy it when it comes up again. It will be hard for them to have had them in an episode and me not like that stuff. The baseball moments were super wholesome, and finally seeing the Superman and Lois version of Jimmy Olsen felt well overdue. Will say, wasn't exactly expecting Jimmy Olsen to be like this, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's just he was very tall. I guess I'm not used to I guess Jimmy being like taller than Clark in a sense, which I guess, you know, Smallville, the Superman films or whatever, doesn't usually feel like that. But I'm hoping we do get to see more of him in the final 3 episodes. Him coming to Smallville at the end, I'm hoping meant that he's going to stick around and not just be sort of gone now. But if he is gone, at least we got to see him before the show ended, and I feel like, you know, he came in a good episode. Like, that was a good way to utilize his character if you only have him for a brief moment of time. A lot of what I thought I heard was supposed to be episode 9 ended up actually being in this episode. I remember on Instagram during filming, they did some of the baseball set scenes during episode 9, so I kind of got in my head that a lot of episode 9 was going to be flashbacks, but I think what I thought was going to be that is actually just this episode. But it was also just a very Easter egg filled episode. Like, a lot of cool little Superman things. Jimmy calling Clark CK, just like the Wraith movie and like Smallville. Jimmy constantly calling himself Clark's pal. All the saves Jimmy mentioned being from the first and second Superman movies, which was a cool little touch. Also a cool Babowski reference, which makes sense, being this season is very heavily influenced by the death and return of Superman. Just in general, though, I do believe this episode felt like as much of a love letter to the character of Clark and the character of Superman that you can have. Like, I genuinely don't think there's been something outside of the comics that has at its core understood the dynamic of Clark and Superman and the struggle of him keeping his secret better than this episode does. And this episode was written by Katie Aldrin and George Kitson, and I just shouting them out because I want to give a huge props to them for understanding the character better than most writers do. But I don't know, I feel bad for making that last video now where I was like, I'm conflicted on the season, because then they put out an episode like this and I'm like, how could I ever hate this show? Or I didn't hate the show obviously, but how could I ever be negative about this show when they're putting out things like this that are so fundamentally true to the core Superman and Clark Kent? Like, I don't know, it's hard. I just, obviously the critiques that I made in that video didn't go away, but I feel like this episode alone has done a lot to bring me back to being like, maybe this season will live up to what I wanted it to be, sort of thing. Like, when all is said and done, maybe I'll be like, oh, that was a great season of TV. So we'll see how the final 3 episodes go. But how did you feel about the newest episode of Superman and Lois? Like it, hate it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, do whatever you can. That would be a huge help. And I hope you have an awesome day.